WPP. Okay. First.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I think we are up and running. We're live. Okay. Thank you. Welcome to the September 21st Sedgwick County staff meeting. At this time, we will call it to order, but we'll hand it over to the county manager, Tom Stoltz.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. We have 3 items for staff discussion this morning. First, Chris Labram will get up. He has a series of building and trade codes which are time to be updated and revised. And so he's brought a lot of staff along as well, and they will step you through that and kind of give you the timeline on how we'll be approaching this in upcoming BOCC meetings. Similarly, Chief Williams is here today with his staff to talk about the fire service drive code, which we have been talking about for a few months. They have an amendment and an update to that code they'd like to discuss with the commission today, and depending on the will of the commission, we will move that forward to BOCC agenda as well. And then finally, Tim will get up at the end and just kind of give us our weekly COVID update and announce a little bit of a change on how we'll be doing testing in the future. So that will finish it up. So with that, we'll start with Mr. Labrum.
Good morning, Chris. Hey, Chris, before you get started, just for my background again and the others, these building codes, many of them, plumbing, electrical, everything, these are required to be reviewed every how many years or whatever and updated?
So, Mr. Chairman, the international and the national codes are updated every 3 years.
Okay.
It's up to local jurisdictions as to how often we adopt those.
Okay.
And as you'll see in the presentation with the trades codes, we try to keep up with those because there's a lot of new technology that comes out, and that gives the industry a chance to use new equipment and new materials.
Right, thank you, because I know that, I think when Mr. Stoltz took over on the merger, that we discovered on the city and county that codes had not been updated in quite a while. So this is not anything brand new. It's quasi-required for all these standards to be updated based on changes in regulations and technology. So with that background, unless I stole your preliminary speech, I just wanted to clarify that.
Oh, thank you. No problem, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. So good morning to you and the commissioners. For the record, Chris Labrum, Director of MABCD. And so few to blast through today. I'll go as quickly as I can, so definitely I'll pause with each one, of course, for question or discussion, but definitely please slow me down if more explanation is needed. So to begin with, we've got, of course, county, we had several boards in which our county positions expired with COVID and the associated code reviews. The timing was a little brutal with that. So we've exercised the clause that allows board members to serve until replaced while we've been trying to find replacements. So we definitely appreciate our board members doing that. We'll have a few more to come, but we do have the electrical board officially titled the Board of Electrical Appeals, that we do have all of our applicants in place, and we are suggesting that we move forward with appointments here. So in this case, we have a single applicant for the first three positions listed there: journeyman, master electrician, and our electrical engineer. Those are all sitting members of the board, and we're recommending that we reappoint those. Excuse me. For our public at large position, we're recommending that we appoint Mr. Steve Vossman, who's participated with the board and assisted with the code review, several things. So he's got a lot of background. You have along with the handout, you should have a sheet that breaks down the applicants that we had for the board. A little bit of additional background there. We did have 3 applicants for this position, which was great to see. One of those is a master electrician, and one of our city master slots will open up in the spring as a member will time out from the board. So we'd actually we're encouraging him to also apply for that slot. We'd like to save that, so to speak, and use him in the slot where he's most qualified for. And then our other 2 are suppliers, electrical suppliers, and in the industry. So both would be very good board members. Mr. Vossman is he's just got a lot more experience, and so again, we're recommending that we appoint him at this point and try to utilize the other applicants somewhere else as soon as we can. So if there are any questions with that.
That'll be coming up. I'm sorry. Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you. So how does this appointment follow in line with the policy that we enacted in 2019 around at-large appointments?
So we advertised, and I'm going to forget exactly when, but we began advertising these in March. And so we posted them for 60 days, took applicants, we've reviewed those. So I guess to simply answer the question, yes, we did follow that policy. And then bringing that to you all today, if you all approve us moving forward, we would have these on the agenda for 6 October, I believe, is our first option to actually appoint.
And so you only had these 3 people apply?
Yes, so for those positions, for the 3 reappointments, they were the only ones who applied. For the at-large position, we did have the 3.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question really isn't about appointments, it's about electrical, okay? I keep getting emails and voicemails from out in western part of Sedgwick County about arc fault. And is there a problem with arc fault and the code?
We are not seeing that problem. I'm very aware of the situation that you're talking about. We actually have some of our board members and Mr. Gallion with WABA. We've talked to about that and a couple of the homeowners out there and the contractor involved. So there are some appliance manufacturers who have not yet fully complied with the code. And there are times when those appliances will trip an arc fault. There's a device that can be purchased and put on those appliances to rectify that signal and remedy that. The industry in general is working with those appliance manufacturers, trying to get those appliances back UL listed, which would solve that problem. All of the other issues we've seen with arc fault come down to the installation. So we believe that is the main issue at hand here. And again, we've had a few conversations about these particular, those homes that were built. And we have offered, again, to go back out and take a specific look at that with a third party to see exactly what has caused those issues.
Okay, well, just be clear, that arc fault is something that's county-wide.
And it's actually nationwide, we could say, Commissioner. So, and yes, it is countywide. We've been installing them for, 15? I don't have Mr. Nordic here today, but more than 15 years, at least in some portions of the home and in all commercial buildings. We did expand the amount of requirement for those in residential homes 2 code cycles ago. So it's been 6 years that we've been under our current guidance.
Okay, and in those 6 years, we built hundreds of homes.
Correct. Several thousand, actually,
Several thousand.
that are under this. And yes, we've had a problem with half a dozen of those. They've been very isolated, and in each case, they've come down to the technique and installation. Our board, the BEA, has continued to take a look at this. They actually have had 2 meetings in which they invited any contractors. We emailed it out and invited anyone that is having issues to come speak to the board. We didn't have anyone actually take us up on that.
Okay, well, we continue to put these arc faults in. We only seem to have complaints from one contractor. So anything that you can do to try and help that one contractor so that we don't continue to have problems, because as soon as he installs something, then the people that buy the homes call me and say that the arc faults are faulty and we got to change the code. So with hundreds of electricians throughout Sedgwick County with thousands of buildings going in, I just don't understand what the problem is. So if you can work with the contractor and find out what he's doing that everybody else isn't doing that's causing this problem, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, sir, absolutely, Commissioner. And we have that in work, and I think we'll have that solved for you soon.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
All right, you bet, sir.
Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you. Can you just explain what that is?
So the arc fault interruption, it's arc and ground fault interruption. So ground fault is if there senses if there's water or a situation where the electricity could ground, i.e. using you as the ground, especially if you were to be plugging something in and it will trip the breaker. Arc fault senses any arcing or interruption in the wiring system, so it protects the building, protects the wiring. So if an arc fault, people will say nuisance tripping, but that's really kind of a misnomer because the arc fault will trip if it senses something. So there is a problem there. Now it is possible it could be a bad breaker. That is rare, especially these days. It's very rare. When they were first made, you would have that at times. But so it is sensing arcing someplace in the wiring, sometimes at the connection. We do find that, again, with some appliances, especially older appliances, the arcing will be in the appliance. So the breaker will trip at times, but there are ways to fairly easily rectify that as well, if that's the case.
Okay, don't see any more questions right now. Go ahead, proceed.
All right, thank you, Commissioners. So next, this is one that you all saw a few months ago with revision of our sanitary and wastewater codes. So we had presented changes and gotten permission to go ahead and put these on. We had them on the agenda to send to KDHE, but based on a few of the questions, we went back, took a relook at, in particular, our lagoon, the size of a lot of which we allow a lagoon. So we want to make a change to this. We have made a change that we want to get you all's approval on. So specifically under wastewater treatment in Chapter 23, Article 4, where we're talking, again, under requirements, locations, and standards. This is all the previous changes that you've seen before. The new change states, first paragraph remains unchanged there. You would still have to comply with all setbacks and distances from any domestic water supply. But the second change there, or the change in the second paragraph, allows us to now build lagoons on lots 3 acres and above. So, and I guess technology is kind of an interesting word to use with a lagoon because it's the oldest style technology, but the materials, the technique, especially the engineering with size and slope and the way that these are now designed and built, we really don't see issues with odor. It is a very effective, very efficient wastewater management system, and it also happens to be the cheapest. So based on a review of those questions, what I'm getting out there is Tim Wagner really likes being able to put lagoons and use lagoons to the maximum extent possible and where it makes sense. We find that actually if you're on 3 acres and above, you can usually get a lagoon on that fairly easily. So we would like to authorize that. It does then also have a clause that even less than 3 acres, you would have the potential to use a lagoon. Anything less than 2 acres is not going to be large enough to be feasible the vast majority of the time. But in that 2 to 3 zone, you do have times when you could apply for a variance, might be able to get a lagoon onto that. It does have a stipulation there that there would probably be some screening associated with those. And then again, there's manufacturer standards with trees and berms that are utilized to kind of screen that lagoon. Also, though, a lot of times when you're in that 2 to 3, and that's one reason we just didn't open that up completely, is you'll have covenants associated with the platting or the way the lots are platted, and we're not going to allow someone to break their covenants or their platting. You would have to go back and go through a separate process to plat lots and allow lagoons if you're going to do that. But that is a proposed, again, update to this before we send it to KDHE, as we would like to authorize lagoons on that smaller lot size.
Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why would somebody choose a lagoon over a septic system?
A lot of the reason is expense. And then again, we actually feel that overall they're generally more environmentally friendly with the way they manage the waste.
Okay, and something as small as 3 acres, you feel comfortable that that's safe?
Yes, sir. And again, the emphasis there is it still has to meet all setback requirements. So you might, depending on shape of a 3 acre lot, there might be some cases where you could not do that safely and properly, but generally we can keep it off of the setbacks, keep it away from domestic water supply, etc.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on that, if you have two small lots that are side by side and neighbors wanted to work together to put a lagoon that would service 2 residences, is that possible under this code?
Yes, Mr. Wagner can approve that.
Okay, thank you.
So, oh wait,
Okay.
being told.
Not a single lagoon, they put 2 sides.
Oh, yes, yeah, thank you for the clarification. So, yeah, so they can put their lagoons, and that their property line, so we can waive the property setback so that their lagoons are on that property line together. But that's right, you can't combine it into one single lagoon. It's still technically their own lagoon. And that's in case the property changes hands
Okay, thank
later on. So, yeah, thanks, Kelly. Sorry about that.
Commissioner Cruz.
Thank Thank you, Chairman. So the Child's Acres properties out in Mays that we have sort of been talking about the past couple of months, where are we at with that situation?
And that one is always an interesting one. I do have Kelly here, who's been involved in that for years. If we want to get into some more detail there, but there are some. So the improvement district, is it through the improvement district, or who's offering the grants at this point? Because there are some situations where with those, and are you, Commissioner, you're talking specifically where we've got small lots with septic?
Yeah.
And some of those were,
small
some of those,
septic
was those
systems.
septics go into failure and different things. So there are some programs where homeowners can apply for assistance to get those septics repaired. And they are, I mean, bottom line, it is challenging because it's a small lot with a septic system. Current code would not allow that, so they are in a non-conforming status, which means that each one of those kind of becomes an individual case of authorizing the septic. It's often challenging to get equipment out there and get it repaired. I know that's not much of an answer, but
So what are we doing to overcome that challenge? I mean, this is people's drinking water. Are we just telling them that they need to apply for this? Is that what you're telling me?
that is that's one thing we do, is try to help them get to the resources to fix that. A lot of what we do too is with our sanitarians go out and try to work with folks and make sure that especially their wells and their septics are up to code and to good repair, functioning properly. Try to make sure that we do keep that distance as best that we can so you don't have any issues with cross-contamination.
So what is the amount of money that's allotted for this? I mean, if we're talking about folks who don't have the resources, does this cover it all, or how?
And
How
I
do
think
they
that
fix
that
their
would
water?
that would depend on the level of repair. But I'll get Kelly up here because he's got a lot more of those details, Commissioner.
Good morning, Kelly Dixon, Metropolitan Air Building. Today I'm wearing my wastewater hat. So the Conservation District has a $2,000 grant available. It's used up every year. I don't know what their max amount of money is, but they start taking applications for it in January, and then they disperse that money in July. It's refunded to the property owner that had a system replaced. As far as Child's Acres goes, I think your concern, if I've caught it right, is more just the problems with it being so confined. Yeah. So I've been doing this since 2003, and we have made setbacks on everything that we've put in there. Sometimes it may require, closing a well and having a new well drilled to be able to make that separation. But we meet our minimum separations between wastewater and water wells. And to date, I don't recall there being any contamination of a drinking water from a wastewater system out there. We don't get E. coli hits out there. We get bacteria hits on water testing, but it's the same bacteria that any house could get at any time. We're not really seeing any contamination from the wastewater systems.
Okay.
The only other way to fix it is to go in there with a public sewer system.
Just want to ensure that, our citizens of our county understand all the options and resources that they have, and if they can't fix something.
Right. A lot of our wastewater
resources.
installers know about the grants, and they actually go in, and that's how they kind of sell the system to people, sell their services, is to let them know that there's money available.
But when there's a gap in the money that it takes to fix it,
Right.
how do we rectify that? That's my concern.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that.
Thank you.
Okay, continue, please.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And the Commissioner, the public sewer system, of course, is a whole different point of discussion, but that would be, if we were to say a fix, that would really be the only way you could say to flat out fix that challenge. So with this piece, if we have commission concurrence, then as stated earlier, we would get this on the consent agenda to go ahead and send it to KDHE in this form. We would, of course, wait for their review, and at the point we get that back, then we would still need to set a public hearing and hold the public hearing since it is a code change.
Okay. Oh, Commissioner Howell, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. There was a discussion about surface water, use of surface water. Is that, where are we on that topic?
And that is in the code that we updated last cycle with that. So we changed that verbiage a little bit. We didn't specifically say that you are not allowed to use that. We just said that any source that you use for drinking water has to meet all KDHE and MABCD standards.
Okay, thank you.
So it doesn't, what we did is we made sure we didn't specifically rule out, by name, any specific source. But the standard will rule several sources out.
Very good, thank you.
Unless you, of course, you were to install a treatment system on your property. All right, if we are ready to move to the mechanical code.
Yes, we are.
We will do that. So ready for, again, to propose adoption of this code with local amendments. This is Article 5 of our Unified Building and Trade Code. As this, and similar to what you've seen with these before, we're updating the international code as well as local amendments. We're basically talking your HVAC system here, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. That, of course, gets very complex when we get into commercial buildings. Again, it's an ICC-based code, and we discussed the timeline for updates. This is a slide that you're familiar with seeing that just reminds us of the codes that we ensured that this is compatible with during the review. A little bit of the background on this. So this was I don't know, no review is easy, so I don't want to make it sound like that, but Stoney said this was a very smooth review, especially since we were already in the 18 that was adopted in late 18. We did correct 7 sections on our UBTC. I say corrected, but it does update those. That's numbers, references, etc. for new codes that we've adopted in different areas. Things that, as you've seen in other discussions, we've been able to take paragraphs out of our UBTC based on things that are now part of the code, etc. So in order to ensure UBTC compatibility, that's all numbering and references, all administrative changes there. There's 5 sections of the baseline code that had a similar level of significant reference changes. Again, all administrative, but we want to make sure that for those who see the code, that they're aware that a lot of the numbering and a lot of the references has been updated when they work and use with these. We were able to delete 1 section from our UBTC, and that's how we handle stop work procedures with mechanical. The reason that has removed is it's covered in the baseline code and in other areas. So we're always happy to see that when national and international codes pick up the standards that we've been using locally. It makes us feel like we're doing the right thing, of course. Now, we did add 1 item to the UBTC, and I don't have a separate slide for this, so I'll cover it now. And this relates to systems, the maintenance of systems, the refrigerator systems, the coolers, some of those where you've got guards associated with those. Those guards will protect the maintenance people, especially if they're on a roof, those kind of scenarios with that. The baseline code, you're either 0 or you're in full compliance with the thick OSHA and engineering standards manual that is very, very intense. And we maintain a local amendment that Mr. Nethercott, as the mechanical chief, along with his board and the engineer on his board, can approve locally the type of guards installed. So that gives us a case where it's easier to protect those who would need them in an area where we would not be able to require the full standards, or where otherwise we may have nothing. So we do have that in there, and see that as an important one. And we will point out, obviously, the more significant parts of the code, but overall, it was a pretty benign set of changes. A lot of thanks, of course, always goes to those who assist. The Board of Mechanical Appeals put a lot of work into this, as they always do. They served also as the review committee, involved the Kansas Cooling Contractors Association, the local sheet metal workers, and WABA with those changes. Two of these we are two of the three amendments that we talk about, we are considering as meets our definition of a significant change to the industry's current practices. So our adoption timeline for this will be, of course, the discussion today, followed by setting the public hearing on the 6th of October, holding the public hearing on the 10th of November, and then planning to present it to the City Council for their ratification on 16 November, followed by a January 1 implementation date. Date's a little tighter than we would like, but again, with kind of the COVID delay, we're in a spot where the industry is waiting on some parts of this code in order to use it, so we want to allow them to do that. We also have the option, so by policy, we'll be in a position where any projects going up to that date that need to utilize the old code would have that option through Mr. Nethercott and through the board. So bottom line is we can manage that if we've got a project that the new code may not make sense to jump to the new code. So just a few again to hit some of the more major pieces of this. Location of exhaust outlets, and this is something that is new in the code, less restrictive than it used to be. We consider this very beneficial to the industry. Allows them to utilize technology that combines exhaust and intake in one fitting, and that allows us to minimize the amount of holes we put in a building, which is always a good thing, whether on the roof or in the sides. So that way, oftentimes they can just have a single penetration for intake and exhaust, and again, the manifold is able to keep those separate. Access doors, this is specific for grease terminations, or grease hoods and different things if we're talking cooking operations. So the code now requires this. The board took a long look at amending it. Says that access doors have to be within 3 feet of the horizontal termination, and that would allow you to clean out those grease intakes and inspect those grease intakes from the interior. So again, we in the past have not required that. The thought of amending that out was there because it does somewhat increase the cost of construction, but further research identified that it then saves quite a bit of money on the maintenance side, and it's also a lot safer because these are one that does get an annual inspection from the fire department. So you've got maintenance workers, firefighters, etc. Otherwise, especially if this is on the 3rd floor of a building, they would be up on scaffolding, up on ladders, those kind of things, trying to clean out, inspect, do that from the exterior of the building. So in the end, we found that for the purposes of safety and in the overall long-term cost, it actually does save money. So we kept that in the code, i.e. did not amend it out, but that will be something new that we will start requiring. And this one is also in the baseline code. This mainly is a clarification and cleanup of the language to just ensure we maintain compliance, and this is based on just the added number of vents that now many buildings have. So new text added to address the possibility of drier exhaust air being introduced into the building's interior. The code has always said that there has to be a 3-foot separation there, but in the example you see with the picture where there's a ventilated soffit, different areas, the code language previously had not really caught up with all of the vent options you have, so it was easy to miss that in design or in their build, but this helps to just clarify that. So like in the example you have here, you can maintain 3 feet from all of those areas, or where you've got a ventilated soffit, if you needed to be within 3 feet of that, you could close that portion of the soffit. Previously, there were usually only vents in parts of soffits, but a lot of the soffits now, the whole thing is vented. So requires us to ensure that, we account for that. So I'll pause there for any questions that we have on the mechanical code.
Okay, any questions? I don't see any at this time, so continue on, Chris.
All right, brings us on to the adoption of the 2021 Uniform Plumbing Code with local amendments. This is a slide that you saw last time I was at a staff meeting, I believe, and that is where we discussed the fact that we have been on a dual code system in the unincorporated portion of the county. That is a bit to manage. The IPC, while a lot, again, like portions of the IPC, we were not seeing a lot of permits pulled under that. The usage kind of did not justify the amount of resources that us and the industry were putting towards this. So we are moving and requesting permission to adopt the 2021 UPC only. That is in the form of Article 3 of our UBTC. This moves us from the 15 to the 21 code. Again, a lot of that was the issue of the two codes. This is an International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials, or IAPMO, as most of us know them, code. And again, based on the fact that we've gone to two codes, now we're back to one code. We're not doing much that the industry is not familiar with, but it obviously will be a pretty significant shift in practice as we go back to this. The list, as you've seen before, of codes that we ensured are compatible, that we're compatible with. And again, speaking of somewhat of a significant shift, so you see us, what we currently have in place is a 2015 UPC with 31 amendments. We have an IPC with 28 amendments. Of course, a lot of those amendments are to help make those codes compatible. In the international code system, the fuel gas code is separate, and the residential code covers a lot of plumbing. So those residential amendments were in place as, again, since we had UPC only in the city, as well as availability of UPC in the county. All of that boils down to a 2021 UPC with 64 amendments. So a fairly significant amendment package, but all in all, not much different. The combination, it hasn't grown a lot with amendments, is I guess what I'm saying there. We do again thank our appeals board of plumbers and gas fitters for their work on this. They had a subcommittee as well that helped them review. Lot of work into this, again, especially since we're reaching agreement on tenets of the international code and the uniform code to be used together. And a very, very, very impressive the level of cooperation that they reached. We were very pleased to see that, because it has not always been that way in that industry. So again, my compliments to them and thanks to them. They did a great job of coming together and just really getting to the facts. So thanks to obviously our industry associates, which include the Heating and Cooling Contractors Association, IAPMO, local area, as well as WABA. And as stated earlier, this amends for desired tenets of the IPC. So same timeline will apply if we have commission concurrence as with the mechanical code. With mechanical code, we'll try to hold those public hearings both on the same day. And we went ahead, when we get to public hearing, we will trim these down to the slides that you're used to seeing, the picture and what this is and why you care. But given this level of change, and to ensure that you have that in front of you, we do have a lot more detail on these with the amendments that are associated with this one. So the first one, which I think everyone is aware of, the fact that we had changed the board in the not-so-distant future, that will, of course, be incorporated in the code, so nothing too significant there. This next one is air admittance valves. So in those cases where it's not structurally practical to vent a system, and usually this comes into play in a remodel, the IPC has always allowed air admittance valves. We actually had this as an amendment in the UPC, so those have been combined and that will stay. And then we also see more on air admittance valves later in the code. But this allows us to keep that where practical, and again where a vent is not practical, mainly applying to remodels. Another one to point out, dead legs, and one that combines the two goes together. This is where you've got pipe with pipe where the recirculation is not happening much, or you can have stagnant water in there. So we try to reduce those as much as possible. And in a case where there needs to be a dead leg that is longer than twice the diameter of the pipe, it has to be accessed in order to flush it. Just trying to make sure that we keep contaminants out of the system and don't have a place where don't have a breeding ground for bacteria. Nail plates. So this is actually one where the IPC, the international code, is more restrictive than the uniform code. It requires a larger nail plate and is a little more restrictive there. So again, that has been brought together and is amended to allow for a smaller nail plate and use, so then especially usually comes to play in residential. So we do have the allowance for the smaller nail plate option where that makes sense. Drainage connections. So this, I'm relating specifically to dishwashers and the way that they are, that discharge is connected. And this gives the option, so this amendment allows the option to use either the international or the uniform plumbing, which are fairly different, take a different approach to that. So again, the option for each, and then it eliminates a UPC requirement for that would require those same standards in a domestic dishwasher. So it removes that, again, allows it just to not be quite as restrictive, and then that also keeps us in line with Kansas Department of Agriculture and state standards because again, hospitals, schools, anything with a state involvement is done to the international code, so that keeps them compatible there. On to seismic provisions. So this is again not necessarily unique to either code. They both have a little bit different approach to the way that they handle seismic. Our main play here is that we are seeing a little bit of an increase in seismic activity in the area, and we just want to make sure that that's properly covered. So there are stipulations to ensure that water heaters, etc., are strapped, and that there's drain pans and areas to get the water away from them if something was to happen to them. And this clarifies how we're going to handle any of those that are elevated. Also has some stipulations there because, of course, if you got a water heater in an attic, the pan set up in the drain and that a lot of times have to be a little different there. So it does give some options that if you can't drain that properly, you could drain. If you can't get the vent drain away from the area, you could drain it into the pan. In those cases, you need to have a water alarm. Pan protects the home. Water alarm lets you know there's a leak. Type scenario. I know that gets a little deep and pretty exciting, but But Jason really likes this stuff, so he's not the only one. I think I saw Lonnie's here too. So we've got a few people that and hopefully I'm doing some level of justice to the technicality of their code here. But
well, you livened it up with the curiosity on the dead legs.
Oh yeah, yes.
I didn't anyway.
Yeah, So next one here, we're talking temperature and pressure of vents. So this is allowance for those TMP as per the IPC, a little bit less restrictive in the amount and type of materials that are used, and then it also allows that in cases where it's not structurally practical to vent that hot water completely away from a water heater, you would be able to vent it into the pan. And yet, again, if approved and if it works, you could go that way. The significance there is, of course, if the hot water heater ruptures, you've got very hot water coming out of it. So that's the significance of trying to get that vented away, but it's just not always practical to do. So the code accommodates that when it can't be, and gives you a way to get it down away from it and down the drain. Next one here, we have, we're talking sealant along with, or glue associated with our pipe and fittings, and this is very simply the IPC-related amendment that allows for one-step cement. So obviously a little time and money savings there, often called blue glue. This is just that, it's a one-step sealant. All right, commercial sinks, discharge of commercial sinks, IPC, let's see, so yeah, the bottom line is this allows us to use both, ensures that it accommodates what we have existing, so that we don't want to make a code change that then puts things that we've approved for the past several years out of code. So this ensures that we've accommodated what we've got out there, what we've been doing, and then it also accommodates both IPC and UPC, gives us some IPC allowances. Another significant part of this is to ensure that we're in line with what KDHE looks at in the field. All right, I think we're about there. So to vent terminations. Bottom line with this is if you've got pipes exposed to the sunlight, and this is not unique to U or I code, both of those codes right now say that if you've got any PVC that is exposed to sunlight, you've got to put a UV protectant on that. We make that less restrictive. We say only if that pipe is 24 inches or longer do you require to UV protect it. Otherwise, you're generally safe, or I shouldn't say generally, otherwise you're safe to not protect it. Obviously still can if a builder sees fit. Getting us back to the air admittance valves. So did not just stop with the use of a valve in the cases of remodels. It addressed it. They made sure to address address it fully throughout the code. So this now expands it across our code and allows, again, when it makes sense, when it's structurally not feasible to vent, structurally the right way to handle this, this would allow air admittance to be used in new and remodeled commercial as well as new residential. So that is something that the UPC did not allow prior, so this will be a new allowance, especially for the city, that can be utilized in those cases where it makes sense. And yeah, fairly significant one there. So trap seal primers, we're talking your the old P-trap, the trap associated with your drain. The UPC trap seals, and those are built so that if the trap dries out, your seal doesn't crack, and then when water comes in, you have significant leaks. The UPC is fairly restrictive on the exact type that needs to be used, so this allows an additional type of trap seal, which is we see as just as effective and just as safe, but is significantly cheaper. And then last one here, again, this has nothing really to do with either code. This has everything to do with public works infrastructure, which is mainly going to impact City of Wichita, some areas in the county, but that are on the city systems. And this has been a policy that's been in place for some time that just simply controls where curb cuts can be made, where your sump pumps, your French drains, anything like that can be drained into the city system, and the way in which that can be put into that system, any of those connections, et cetera. And we find it important to, especially when we're enforcing this, enforcement doesn't make nearly as much sense if it's a policy of ours versus if it's actually in the code. So that will now, again, it's not a change to practice other than the fact that it is code and not policy from here on out. And I think that gets us through all of those.
Okay, Commissioner Howell.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Chairman. So first thing I wanted to ask is, you mentioned that the Builders Association has been part of this discussion, and they are supportive of all these changes, and they're okay with going in this direction?
Correct.
Okay. And then I'm thinking back to the arc fault discussion. For years, we opposed amending our electrical code to mandate arc fault devices in Sedgwick County, and eventually, I think the builders just got tired of the discussion and decided to go ahead and, I guess, concede their argument. And so we went in that direction, but I don't think that was, I guess, thinking back about that, I wasn't really thinking that was the right thing to do at the time, but we went that direction because we just kind of got tired of it. So I feel like that's where we are today with this discussion today. For the most part, I have to say, I appreciate the thoughtful way that we're trying to, I guess, make the UPC a better code. And so first of all, let me just say thank you to the board members, and thank you for those that I think made very reasonable amendments to the code that I've been talking about for a very long time. And I'm trying to think if there's a few things here, I don't think there's a few things that you mentioned today, so let's go through those real quickly. First of all, you talked about the air admittance valves. If you have a new build, a new residential facility, residential home, and they want to put a kitchen island in, would that be a place where that would be allowed?
I'll make sure I get this right, Jason, but that would depend on structural feasibility.
Yeah. So again,
So it would not just be carte blanche that you could use an air admittance valve regardless. It would have to make sense with the location, and I think generally in the case of an island, that's why those were invented, is because those are very tough to vent. Is that?
so the word that's used here in the language here is it's impractical. I guess I would say I'm not sure that it's necessarily impossible to do that in some cases. It's just, it doesn't really add a huge element of safety. It is quite a lot more difficult. It's a lot more difficult to install a loop vent on every island. And just say, I would think that's a place where we ought to just allow them. I think that'd be reasonable, but I think Jason Little apparently needs to say something here.
For the record, I am Jason Little, the Chief Plumbing Inspector for the Metropolitan Area Building and Construction Department. Good day, Commissioners and Mr. Chairman. It's the considered opinion of the vast majority of our citizen plumbers in our district that have spoken up on this, that the best method to assure a proper working plumbing system is to have a vent wherever it is practical. Now, that is a judgment, a value judgment on where it's practical. But the best way to address that is with a vent out. And even if it's the island loop vent with foot vent going out. But we are finding more and more houses that have the vault ceiling design, and because of the way the structure is supported with the framing, that there are instances where it is not safe or structurally practical to take that vent out. The majority of occasions where we see these islands, and almost every house has an island now, are ventable practically. And it's not an issue where we're talking about a difference of thousands of dollars, perhaps not even hundreds of dollars. We're talking a difference of tens of dollars to install an island vent. So,
Yeah, okay. I don't know that I agree with that last comment. I appreciate your perspective, and I certainly do respect the fact that you have a lot of knowledge on this, but, I've seen what loop vents, the requirements of a loop vent, and they're, again, which you almost have to draw it out for everyone to understand exactly what we're talking about. But if you have an island that, say, is 10 feet from the next adjacent wall, and you have to run a vent all the way out the roof for that island, it has to go down that wall, across the floor, up into the island, to the top of the island, above the bottom of the sink, and then it's got to go back down to where the drain is. And so there's actually several pipes under the island. One of them is a vent, although it goes through the floor. It's actually a vent. It's a dry vent, and it also has to have its own drain because of rainwater and things like that goes in there. So it's fairly complex. And again, if the air admittance valve has, and I don't remember that, I don't have one in front of me today, but we know that they have 100,000 cycles before they'll fail. And if it did fail, the worst thing is you would smell an odor. You would say, hey, what's that smell? And you might call a plumber out, and they would say, oh, your air admittance valve has failed. So it's a fairly minor risk and much more simple to use an air admittance valve in that particular case. And so, again, this is one of those things where I feel like the fight continues. I don't know why we're continuing to fight about this. IPC has used air admittance valves on new construction and islands for a very long time. It worked just fine. I don't know why is this still the point of contention? I don't know. I appreciate the fact that in some cases there is now some allowance, but what I don't like about this is it seems to be subjective. I don't like codes that come down to an opinion of someone that says, I think in this case you can do it this way, in that case you can do it that way. To me, the codes ought to be clear, and I don't think this is clear. This is subjective, and I think that to make it objective, clean this up, I would either allow them or don't allow them. But I think that in either case, that would be, I'd say to allow them because we have much experience across this country. They do work fine, and I don't know why we would continue to say the loop vent is a safety concern on a kitchen island. It just really isn't.
And an air admittance valve cannot account for back pressure on the system, Commissioner. It can only allow air admittance, hence its name. Whereas a plumbing vent through the roof can account for back pressure.
Okay. All right, I'll stop talking about that. We'll continue working on that one. One of the big differences in IPC and UPC has been the number of toilets allowed on a branch. Does this address that? These amendments address that in any way?
The amendments do not, Commissioner, but the body of the code in the 2021 edition of the UPC has amended the section for fixture loading on 3-inch pipe. The previous editions had a limitation of 3 toilets on a 3-inch horizontal line and 4 toilets on a 3-inch vertical pipe. And that has been changed in the body of the code to 5 toilets on a horizontal or vertical 3-inch waistline. So by increasing it, that's pretty dramatic from the old standard. It has been said that there is the potential in the wording of the I codes that I think you could potentially have up to, I think it was 15 toilets. We've never seen that attempted. Never seen that attempted in any installation.
And you might think, there's some buildings where you might see a very large, public restroom that's got many, many fixtures built in, and that's where that becomes important. What's required there? I'm not sure who's the right person is to ask these questions, but on the drain connection amendment, it talks about that the loop must be in the sink cabinet to the highest point possible. If the dishwasher has a loop built into it, is that still a requirement? And how would you know if it? Does this loop need to be visible and inspectable from the sink cabinet, or can it be something that's over by the dishwasher as part of the dishwasher assembly?
The installation guides and standards for each individual appliance brand and model specify whether it will have that feature or not. So that's readily identifiable for the inspector. Any installation of an appliance, where the installation guide is absent is typically a failure of inspection, because there are so many different models, brands, and styles. So both codes, the I and the U, would state that they require a vacuum breaker type of device installed on the top of the countertop. So this amendment allows us to try to install those in a sensible manner, where that loop of the hose is done underneath the kitchen cabinet, allowing it to connect to the garbage disposal or another type of connection in the drain work below the sink. It would not be visible, as a regular course of observation by a homeowner. But the other method with the vacuum breaker on top of the countertop, it's unsightly. It's another hole in a very beautiful installation, and it leaves more room on that countertop for those appliances that are wanted, like hot water dispensers, sprayers, and the multitude of different designs of faucets with their spread designs, separate handles, the many things that you
I wasn't
come
the
in
one
there.
talking about the vacuum breaker need. I'm talking about the drain line. It says it's got to be looped as high as possible within the sink cabinet and securely fastened. Mm-hmm. And so
That-
a lot of the dishwashers have that loop built into them. That's what I'm wondering. So
No, they don't.
they don't. Okay. All right.
And that section mainly applies to residential models. There's, a pretty big difference between the residential models for under cabinet installation and the commercial models, which are more freestanding and much more bulky in appliance.
Okay. Thank you for that. And on venting, in the past, under the UPC, the vent that was for each fixture was basically the same size as the discharge of that particular fixture. So if you had a 2-inch drain, for example, you needed a 2-inch vent and that type of thing. And under UPC, those vents basically had to make their own roof penetration. They weren't allowed to be combined with other vents within that plumbing system. Where are we at with these amendments on what's being proposed today? Where are we at? Can the venting be one size smaller? Can you combine vents so you have less roof penetrations?
Yes, absolutely. In the body of the code, say a 2-inch drain, per your example, the maximum fixture loading for drainage is 8 fixture units on a 2-inch drain. But in the venting section, you can put 24 fixture units on that 2-inch line. So you can combine multiple fixtures together in the attic or in the wall and take it out one time and get up to 24 fixture units on that. So like on 1.5 inch, you can only have typically 1 fixture unit on that. But if I recall correctly, it's 8 fixture units of venting on that 1.5 inch. So there are many opportunities to reduce the number of penetrations. Now, we discussed that at length in the meetings, and a factor that's influencing the trades is that the cost of materials has skyrocketed. So there are times when, if you're constructing a large structure that's very spread out, that combining those vents together in the attic is going to be much more expensive for that property owner and that builder to do than to take it out individually.
I'm not suggesting we should mandate that they have to combine. I'm just simply saying it's an option. So you could either make its own roof penetration, or you would have the option of combining it so as to minimize the number of roof penetrations. In many cases, that makes a lot of sense. And so I would like to make sure that's it's optional. Now, the reason I know that is if you drive around places where you can see UPC plumbing or IPC plumbing, you can tell by the number of vents that come out the roof how it was plumbed. And some of these homes in Wichita, you can count 15 things poking out the roof, and that concerns me. That they have a roof that's probably fairly vulnerable to failure because of all those roof penetrations. And so, trying to minimize that is a good thing. One of the most expensive things on your entire building is your roof, and I don't want to arbitrarily make it have less life because of a code. And so less penetrations is generally preferable. And
Absolutely.
so again, and also being able to downsize the vent in some applications, maybe not, again, if you said 24 would be allowed in that case, I assume that's for a full-size for a full-size vent. But if you don't have, say you have 8 fixture units on the drain, maybe you can go down to 1.5-inch vent, for example. In that case, if you didn't combine it to other things, at that point, 8 fixture units probably would be ventable through a 1.5-inch line. I would
Yes,
assume.
that's correct.
So you can downsize, and that's the IPC theory. So I think that's good. All right. Well, I got some things to look at here. Thank you for the presentation. I would, Chris, I don't know if it'd be possible for me to get a copy of all the amendments. I sure appreciate the chance to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you,
Chris,
Mr.
this is
Chairman and
for you.
Commissioners.
Thank you. So this is just like a global question. Are you familiar with the Better Buildings Challenge by the U.S. Department of Energy?
I have heard of it. I'm not very familiar with it, though.
Do we have, is anyone in your department working on sort of what the future of building looks like?
Actually, interesting you would ask. Our deputy, Courtney Capello, was at the ICC conference this week, which and a lot those discussions include that. So yes, he as our building official, he's the one that kind of leads all of that effort. Exactly that future of those things, energy code, any of those directions. Along with Paul Hayes and Brett Johnston.
So the Better Buildings Challenge, it talks about how in the U.S. it costs $20 billion a year to power the buildings where we work, shop, and go to school, and another $20 billion for industrial energy use. On average, 20 to 30% of energy is wasted. By reducing the waste of energy in buildings, we can save energy and money, create good jobs, and avoid significant emissions of CO2. And so I just wonder how we're trying to, hundreds of organizations have taken this challenge, small local governments from government to private organizations, and I just wonder how we're sort of looking at the future of building. Here coming up, we're going to be looking at the future of our workforce. We have a $150,000 ask from the Greater Wichita Partnership to do just that. So I wonder what we're doing as far as all of the buildings that we're building here in Sedgwick County and how we're looking toward the future of that. So I'd love to hear more about what they have learned and how we plan to keep this discussion alive and do a better job or try to improve so that we can do our part.
Absolutely. And in general, of course, for example, trying to keep up with codes. That's one reason that we do that is because we see new technology and a lot of gains in each of those cycles. We continue to try to gain certifications in some of those areas. I know there's more that we could get. This discussion was actually on the table last week while I was at WABA with their Codes and Standards Committee meeting to discuss exactly that. Some of everything from solar panels and individual wind turbines at homes. Part of that discussion, interestingly, is because Andover has a new building official coming from a different jurisdiction. So we were all kind of talking about what he has seen in his previous jurisdiction compared to what we're doing here. A lot of that ties in with how our utility providers, how their grid is structured and what works, what are challenges for our area compared to others. One example of that is we're not in a place where the utility grid is overloaded. So we don't see as much gain by just taking a home off of the electrical grid, for example. And so therefore, our utilities are not as interested in power sellback, et cetera, to them and those sort of things. But so that means we see a lot of gains with green energy when they put solar farms, like we've seen a few solar farms go in recently next to substations and some different things like that. So we do try to keep up with all of those the best we can. Obviously, there's a lot to that, and it is an ongoing discussion. We can look a little further specifically into to this particular one. And I'll be very interested to see a lot of what Mr. Capello brings back. I know that he's in several seminars with that. That covers everything from how we handle our permits and our appointments all the way to exactly this topic.
That's great to hear. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that WABA and other builders in our community are really thinking about that. So I was just kind of curious to what we're doing here as a local government. So I appreciate you having someone that's paying attention to that.
I might also mention, Commissioner, the Builders Association is always probing energy code and actually build and experiment with structures. And it all comes back to return on investment and cost benefit. And so they're very dialed in to, I mean, even if you have to pay a few more thousand on the front end of a house, if you can save money over 5 years, for example, on green energy, then, but sometimes the payback on that becomes decades or, not practical. But the Builders Association is very aware of this and constantly probing as well, so.
Okay. Chris, I don't see any other questions or comments. What else do you have?
Thank you, Commissioners. And then, of course, if further more detail or discussions, I did bring an amendment package for you, Commissioner Howe. I think I've still got my stack here, so we'll make sure that we get that to you. Happy to hold further individual meetings to discuss further details on this if required between now and the 6th of October.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate the presentation and the support, people. Thank you. Tom, next up.
Very good. Chief Williams, let's talk about what we're talking about codes today. We can talk about service drive code now.
Morning, Chief.
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Doug Williams, Fire Chief. We were brought up on the service drive code. Let me get this in a slide format. There it is. The one thing, the service drive code was created back in 2004. There were some events that occurred at the time, and a committee that was made up of fire officials and code officials and some commissioners at the time developed the service drive code that we've applied for 17 years now. That drive, it had some compaction requirements and road surface requirements, as well as a 20-foot wide requirement. It also has turn-in radius requirements for the gates and so that the trucks can make the clearance off of roads and so forth. One of the things that's constantly we've had recently looked at was the width of the service drive. I know one of the commissioners, Commissioner Howe, has addressed it with us, and is the 20-foot necessary? And so we looked at this, and we were the manager's office asked us to work with WABA and the Board of Codes and Standard Appeals and to come up with a compromise, as you might call it, or an agreement that reduces the driveway somewhat, but yet still meets the requirements that we have. So I think when we looked at this, we went out and one of the suggestions brought up was a 14-foot drive instead of the 20. One of the things that we did, we went out and we found a 14-foot drive, and we did some experimenting with it. And one of the things we found out with the 14-foot drive is that if we lay hose down this road, which is we normally carry around 800 to 900 foot of 5-inch hose on our engines and quints. And if we lay that 5-inch hose down this roadway and supply it from the road, which is our preferred method, once that hose goes down that road on a 14-foot driveway, it blocks the road. So we got an example of this Quint 32 laying the hose down 14-foot drive. And one thing to notice too is if you look at the rear end of this truck, as that hose unloads, it crosses back and forth. You know, when it's stacked, it goes from one side to the other. If you look at the width of that hose bed, where it's laying off the right side now, but as it keeps unloading, it's going to zigzag back and forth. So you can't just say, okay, drop the hose off the right side or the left side. It just doesn't work. This hose, the 5-inch hose that we use for supply line, is 100 pounds per 100 foot. It's basically a pound a foot uncharged. Once we charge it, it's 9 pounds more of water per foot. So this hose is 9.5 to 10 pounds per foot. If we lay 600 foot of this, we're estimating 3 tons of hose and water laying on that roadway. This is something that we just don't scoot over to the side. You know, once it's on the ground, it's there. So that's one of our struggles with the reducing the driveway widths, because what a lot of people don't think about, the first-in engine lays that hose with 3 people, and everybody else is going to end up out on the primary road, and all of our fire attack and rescue men and equipment are going to be packing their stuff the length of that roadway if it's too narrow to take other apparatus down. And so we kind of this is what a scenario would look like if we don't maintain a road width that we can get secondary apparatus in there. We would be, this would be the interior attack and rescue crews would be carrying their hose and all their equipment 500 to 600, maybe 700 foot. So one of the things that we talked about is, so where does this change for us? Because we had a code in the past, the 20 foot was for residential, say a farmstead, but once you went past the farmstead, if they had accessory buildings, then it could be 14 feet drive after that point. But in that period, they have to have, I call them passing lanes, some people call them turnouts, but they put in passing lanes so that the trucks could meet and pass each other. So what we did when we looked at this was we said, if somebody wants to build a quarter or half a mile back, we're only going to lay hose up to 600 to 800 feet. Once it's beyond that, we're not going to dump that hose. We're just going to have to take all the apparatus to the scene. And then it's just a matter of our tender trucks passing each other. So it wasn't such a big deal to have the 20-foot driveway. We could narrow the driveway because the hose wasn't going to be on it. But we could put in some passing lanes to where those trucks could pass each other coming in and out, or an EMS unit that had to come get in or out could pass the fire trucks. And so where we went with this through the discussions with WABA is, if a home is we're going to lay hose up to 800 feet, 600 to 800 feet. If the home is going to be built within 800 foot of the roadway, we wanted to maintain the 20-foot road. And that way, for our firefighting and our crews, we can get to drop the hose, get the trucks there. Past 800 feet, that width, that 20-foot wide is not a big deal to us because we're not going to lay the hose. So we were willing to compromise and say, okay, we're okay with 14 foot as long as they put a passing lane in every 500 feet so that the trucks could pull over and pass each other. And once again, we just threw this in here because this was the scene we were at. This turned out to be a mutual aid call. We went into by Rose Hill, and you can see that in the bad weather, we ended up with trucks stuck in that right there. So there is a real important value to having a solid surface good road, and the only chance we get to get the road right is when they build, because in a residential structure, there's no inspections or code compliance after the original build. You know, a business, we go out and inspect every year. Residential, once it's built, it's done. And we can't go back 2 years later and say, you need to fix this or that, because we don't have any real authority on residential. So anyway, here's the end, and here's the changes that we worked with WABA to go from the 20-foot road. We're still maintaining the turn-in. We got to keep the turn-in radius. But our changes that we required or worked with WABA and BCSA to compromise on is if the home residence is built 800 foot or less than 800 foot, we want them to have 600 foot of 20-foot driveway. And that way, when we lay hose that 600 to 800 foot, we can get our other trucks within 200 foot of the building. If you build beyond 800 feet, whether it's 802 or whether it's 900 or 1200 or a 3/4 mile, you can build the 14 foot. Once you make the turn-in requirements, they can take 14 foot all the way for that half mile, as long as they have the I call them passing lanes, in the code is turnouts. As long as they have the passing lane turnouts every 500 feet, then we're allow it 14 foot from after the required turn in the rest of the way. And we also, the new International Fire Code required the 75,000 or 76,000 compaction ratio, and we took that out and we left it at the 46,000 compaction ratio that's in the current code. So we did not upgrade that. That was one of the things the builders were really concerned about. And I think that's the changes that we're recommending.
Okay, Chief, I know you've been really looking at this. It's nice to know that, to me, that the last time this was really looked at seriously was in 2004, your original statement. So I'm sure it's time that this needs to be updated. So thank you. Looks pretty good to me. Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. Just so to reiterate, we're simply saying that for the first, trying to read this paragraph again. So the 20 foot is still going to be required for the first 600 feet.
Only if the house is less than 800 foot setback. If you're a half a mile, it can be 14 foot from after you get past the turnout, it can be 14 foot if it's more than 800, because we're not going to lay hose. If it's more than 800 foot, we're just not going to drop that hose because it's too far.
So when someone builds a new driveway, it gets inspected and gets signed off to these standards. Once that's done, is it ever re-inspected? Is there ever any type of requirement to maintain these standards?
Well, I'd have to refer that to our guys or the MABCD guys, but to my knowledge, on a residential structure, once it is built and the occupancy is signed off on, that we have no authority, unless there's a remodel.
Well, you can drive around the county, in the rural parts of the county. You can see what actually happens. Mm-hmm. People drive, the same exact path. In fact, you might even see the left wheel and the right wheel, so to speak, and maybe even weeds between the wheels, for example. I mean, you'll see all kinds of things, but you'll typically see much less accommodations than what's been described in this code. And I would say 99% of rural residences that have gravel driveways or dirt driveways are not even anywhere near this standard. Only things that are brand new. I remember. It was a lot longer distance from the street to where the house would be. But we I remember looking at a property and talked to the homeowner, and they were going to build a house back in the back there, and the estimate for the driveway was $100,000 or more just for the driveway to meet this standard. And you put money into the driveway, you don't have that money to use other ways. And so again, I want to be safe. I want to make sure people are protected and they can get fire protection services when they need them. But this is a very high standard, and I would just say, out of 105 counties of our state, have we looked at what other counties in our state are doing currently? Do we know what other?
We did research, and there is some counties that have some requirements, and but our 20-foot requirement was the most strict that we found.
So again, I'll just say I do think we are the most strict out of 105 counties of our state. We've adopted something that's much more restrictive and much more expensive than every other county in our state. We received an email a while back, and they make a comment that Let me just read the sentence. It says, current Sedgwick County policy was originally presented to the county commissioners as a recommendation from the International Fire Code, Chapter 5 Fire Services. However, the county commission implemented the policy without the paragraph of exceptions in which the international standard clearly excludes single-family residences and some small businesses from the two-lane fire apparatus access road requirement, regardless of distance from existing roads. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they make that comment. Go ahead.
The thing the misrepresentation in that comment is the International Fire Code does not address residential structures. So for them to say that it's completely thrown out of the International Fire Code is not correct, because the International Fire Code does not address residential structures.
In practice, when you have to respond to a fire call in the county does not have a driveway built to this, because again, maybe the house has been there for a long time, and maybe it was at this standard at some point, but it was never maintained at this point. How do you manage the hose going down the driveway and getting other response vehicles closer to the home? How do you do that now? I mean, if it's not possible, are you parking one vehicle up there in the front, and then you only have one vehicle near the home, and a hose goes down the middle of the driveway, and everybody has to carry everything in from the street? That's how it's done today?
That would be correct, yes. Up to the amount of, as I say, we're dumping up to 900 foot. I think our largest truck has 1,000 foot of hose. So yes, they could be walking, carrying all their equipment 1,000 foot.
Well, obviously that's not acceptable, but I'm just trying to find out what, how it really works, because it just I guess I'd be surprised if the other vehicles can't get close. Some of these vehicles are actually designed to do grass fires, for example. They can drive across, unimproved land, for example. Surely they can get closer.
We do not respond brush trucks on structure fires.
Okay.
Unless there's a grass fire that gets a structure or something. But
So,
I mean, we cross-staff tenders and brush trucks, so a tender would go to a building fire and a brush truck would not.
I'll just say this: one of the things we have to look at as policymakers is let's not overregulate. Let's not do things that are so expensive that we become out of balance. Again, I think there's a balance in every one of these issues. There's a balance between what's reasonable, reasonable safety ideas, and what is maybe going too far. And I have examples. One example I will use is that when the state fire marshal recommended improvements in schools for fire barriers, it was the estimate was so expensive, and the millions and millions of dollars the state of Kansas, frankly, reacted, and those ideas were quickly put away because it just wasn't. There wasn't really a reason to do those things. It sounded like a great idea to somebody, but it wasn't really necessary. Do we want our kids to get hurt in a school fire? Of course not, but it's never happened before. And schools have tremendous amounts of fire protection built into them already. There's smoke detectors, there's fire extinguishers, all kinds of things. The reality is that the recommendation was maybe a little bit of overkill. They did the same thing with new construction residential sprinkler systems being required as a state law. That blew up in our state. That was hugely controversial, and they dropped that idea. So this is one of those things where it may sound like a great idea. They got adopted here, but I don't know if I think maybe it's overdone. And I appreciate a small concession here. It's just not enough, though. Thank you, Chairman.
Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chief, thank you for being here today. Let's get back on topic of this subject. You've worked with WABA and other organizations to come up with the plan, the procedures that you've got and that you've outlined today, correct?
That's correct. We've worked with Mr. Gallion of WABA. We met with him twice, and we actually met with the BCSA over the course of 3 months. So this has been voted and supported by both of those agencies.
Good. I appreciate that. How much does a quint cost?
1.2 million.
1.2 million. What's a tender cost?
400 plus.
And how many of those do we send out if we've got a house, a residential house on fire that's 1,200 foot off the road?
Our primary response to that would be 3 engines or quints, and 2 tenders.
So we're sending $5 or $6 million worth of equipment out there, plus all of our staff, all of our firefighters that we're putting them in danger too.
Yes.
How much does a quint weigh?
That would be a good question. One thing that we had this discussion with BCSA is fire trucks generally are overweight because they're DOT exempt. And when you put the water and hose and everything necessary, generally fire trucks are per axle are overweight. That's just a fact. And
I understand that, but we're sending them down roads that people don't want to have maintained. They don't want to build it right to begin with, so that we can get $5-6 million worth of equipment down there, plus all of the firefighters. So that's a concern to me. What's it cost to pull one of those fire trucks out when it gets stuck on that road?
Well, several $100s. The worry we have isn't the cost of pulling them out as much as the damage that can be done to an apparatus like that when it is stuck.
Okay. Well, I understand people that want to save money. Can they put in a fire sprinkler system in their house? And is
That's
that
an
a way
option.
So they do have other options, and besides what is presented here today. I am just extremely concerned whenever anyone talks about trying to reduce our requirements in order to be able to save someone else money when we're spending millions in order to be able to protect that home. So I will not ever be in favor of us backing off requirements and putting our equipment and our firefighters in jeopardy in order to save somebody some money. They have other options, such as putting in some type of sprinkler systems. They have the option to follow this guidelines. So I am disappointed that we're even addressing this. Thank you.
Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to be clear, with this code, this is not an option. This is a requirement. So someone could do more than this, but this is minimum requirements outlined in this code, correct?
That's correct.
So if somebody wants to do less than this, that's not an option. They can only do what this says or more.
There was an option in the, is that option still in the code, the other fire protection? The code has a paragraph that you can come up with other applicable fire protection devices, which would be Commissioner Dennis's comment, something to the effect of a sprinkler system.
Okay. So, as I said a minute ago, if you drive around the county and look at what actually goes on, I'm going to just spitball 99% of these driveways out there are not per this code. And so if we're going to mandate, this is the code we want to follow, and we don't want to put anybody at risk, or make sure everybody can get all the apparatus you want up to a home that's on fire, okay, then we need to start regulating that and inspecting those and enforcing the standard across the county. That's really our position.
Well, sir, I think that you're right. Anything that was built before 2004, we don't know how it was built. It could be a horse trail. This code, the 20-foot code that we're actually backing off of a little bit, was created in 2004. And for a few years, MABCD checked it out, and for the last 7 or 8 years, the fire department does. And we sign off on that driveway before MABCD will give an occupancy certificate to a homeowner. So I would disagree with your comment that 99%, because everything that's been built since we've been enforcing the code has been built to this code.
I agree. They were built to the code, but if you don't maintain that driveway, it quickly degrades. It's not going to stay at that level. And by the way, this code includes height requirements, width requirements, and compression requirements. It's not just a width requirement. There's all kinds of other parts to this as well. And so it's not, this is a lot of regulation. And at the end of the day, if we're going to say this is what's required to keep people safe, then we need to enforce it everywhere. I think we're being very inconsistent, possibly a little bit hypocritical. We maintain this extremely high standard for brand new construction, then back off entirely, and anything goes after that's fine. This is again the highest standard of our state. It's the most regulation of our state. It's more regulation than most places in the country. This is extremely, again, it's very, I would say it's not balanced. If you had a lesser standard, somebody wanted to go above and beyond and add a 30-foot driveway, they could do that. Nothing says you can't have a wider driveway. To characterize this as though I'm being reckless or putting people in danger, I think is unfair. I'd ask you for a report, please. Talk about how many people have been injured because of a driveway that wasn't wide enough, or how many trucks were stuck, and how much money we spend on pulling trucks out, and how much damage was done to these trucks. To characterize those accusations that I'm being reckless with asking for less regulation, I think is unfair. If those are real things, please quantify those things and let me understand what's actually being done.
We do not track in our incidents. I can't go back and tell you how many trucks were pulled out 5 years ago. I cannot do that. We don't track that. We don't document that. Maybe we could find some tow bills in the faster system. That's possible, but we've never tracked damaged apparatus from being stuck.
Okay, well, I'm sure was it one a year? I mean, you probably know if it was one or two, or if it was dozens. I mean, you probably have an idea. I mean, you have some idea, I'm sure. People in your department, they have lots of experiences. You guys take pictures, you guys document things in reports. I think there's ways to find that out. But my point is, if this is a huge problem, let's quantify the problem. You talked about damage to trucks, cost to tow them out, people who can't put out fires because they can't get to the structures because they get stuck on the roads. On it goes. I read some of these reports. You guys, there was a fire in my district not too long ago, and I read the report. How many trucks responded to that fire? It was impressive. Also brings a question to my mind. It was such a huge response. It was a little surprising. Okay, I don't think they lacked personnel or lacked equipment at that fire. It was enormous response, and I went and did a write-out just several months ago. We got a call, and I loved the experience. It was wonderful. I believe that I may be off of my numbers right now, but around 14 or so trucks showed up to that fire. It was a garage fire. There was people everywhere. Even Homeland Security showed up to that fire. There was no lack of equipment. There was no lack of personnel. So again, to characterize this as we can't get to people, we can't save lives, we're getting stuck on the roads, we can't provide fire protection services because we don't maintain a 20-foot wide driveway, I think is an unfair characterization. So if we have these issues, damage to trucks, houses burning down, people dying, firefighters getting injured, and on it goes, please quantify those things to justify this high level of regulation requirement. And if it's truly necessary, let's continue to enforce this on every residence in Sedgwick County, not just the day they get their occupancy permit, but after that. Otherwise, it's hypocritical.
Okay, Chief, when is your proposal to bring this in front of the commission for approval?
That'd be up to the manager.
Okay, well, I mean, you can get reports and from my perspective, you don't have to research the whole nation to see if we're the most restrictive in the whole nation, as was said. So just get whatever reports you can supply to a commissioner that's requesting them. But I think it's time to move on with this. So I don't see any other questions. So thank you for the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
And
Next up.
Last but not least is a quick COVID update from Mr. Kaufman.
Good morning, Commissioners. Tim Kaufman, Deputy County Manager. Please give me
Morning,
just a
Tim.
second to pull stuff up. Start with the dashboard report. Our current rate is 8.8% positivity. There is a significant change in the number of deaths. We're at 741 now. Adrian did send you a note this morning that kind of explains this. So we don't put deaths on our COVID dashboard until they've been confirmed by the Kansas the state vital records department, and sometimes those get sent to us in batches. So it's not like we had 20 deaths in the last few days. This may represent weeks of, or even months of deaths. Once the KDR gets that confirmation, they send it to us in batches, and so that's why we see that significant jump today. Again, case numbers continue to look like they did back in January. On our hospital status, we did see a slight decrease this week from the hospitals reporting, and I thought that we had the new graph. I don't see the new graph yet. I'll send that out to you this afternoon. We know that based on the reports that we received from the hospital this week, 90% of the people that were COVID positive were unvaccinated. We don't have the information yet about ICU, or what percentage, but it's going to be that number, or potentially even greater. But in terms of the presentation, we've got similar numbers to last week in what we've done. I think this is the one I want. Yeah. We're starting to report on third doses as well. So we did 416 doses last week at the health department, either at our 223 South Main or at a mobile or partner clinic. So we're now up to 117,363 considered fully vaccinated, and the health department has given 238,000 doses in the community. The other thing that I was going to talk about today was the vaccination rate that we're seeing in the community. So first dose, we're at of the 12 and older, the eligible population, we're just over 56% fully vaccinated, we're just over 51%. And for total population, we're at 46.7% and 42%, almost 43% fully vaccinated. Now, we also know that there are folks in the community that have been vaccinated that we don't have the data on. So they may have been vaccinated at McConnell, they may have been vaccinated at the VA. So these numbers slightly, very slightly underrepresent the full vaccination in the community. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is our COVID testing. We know that we're challenged space-wise at the Sunflower Shelter. It served us well early in the summer. It's too small at this point in time, so we've worked with facilities. We've identified a space. We had a bid board meeting yesterday, and so tomorrow at the BOCC agenda, there'll be a lease opportunity for you to approve that, and if you do, we'll be able to move in about 10 days to a much larger facility that will give us the opportunity to socially distance the 300 to 400 that we're testing daily now. And we anticipate again that the number of folks that may need to be tested could increase. One of the things that we experienced last fall as we move into the flu season is that oftentimes if an individual called their family physician because they felt like they had the flu, the physician's office would ask them to get a COVID test first and rule that out. And so we anticipate as flu becomes more visible in the community, we expect more people to be testing to find out whether or not it's flu or COVID. So we appreciate the opportunity to bring you a lease for additional space tomorrow so that we can expand our testing space and make it a more comfortable environment for both staff and our guests. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Well, Tim, thanks for the update. Got a couple questions here. Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you. You mentioned flu season's coming up in the near future. When is the health department going to start administering flu shots?
We should begin that in the month of October, and we'll make sure that we communicate that clearly across the community that what we've got and where we've and when we're doing it.
Okay. Now, I always ask about seniors. The last couple of years, we haven't gotten the senior vaccine in. Are we getting some of that this time?
It's my understanding that we have submitted an order. Last year, we submitted an order, and we didn't get the full amount that we requested, and we got it much later than we requested it. And so hopefully we'll get what we asked for, and that we'll get it earlier in the season this year.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to clarify. So the 416 weekly vaccines provided, this is just Sedgwick County only.
Correct.
Do we have any way to find out what's happening in the county from other vaccine providers? I mean, the number you're providing down here, the 51.1%, that's a calculation based on all providers, correct?
Correct. We should be, well, all but those that we don't get data on. I think that we would be able to get data from KDHE that represents all of the vaccinations provided, but it's going to be weeks behind. So we could, I'll see if we can capture that data and how far behind it is.
Okay.
Because certainly there's no obligation for vaccine providers to report to the health department the vaccines that they've given. They do report that to KDHE, and then
Do we know how many places people can get? Do we track how many providers are actually providing vaccines now? I mean, it's quite high.
We've got that information on the website. There's probably, if you look at all of the different pharmacies and you look at the number of retailers, there may be 40 or 50 different sites.
Okay. The reason I think it's important is because early on, when our vaccine rates in the county were pretty high, we were almost the exclusive provider at that early time. And if you compare that with what's going on here, I mean, this number by itself, 416, is so low. It's dismal. It's just not. If this is the rate we're talking about, we'll never get out of this pandemic. Obviously, that's just. I appreciate those providing those vaccines, but it's just such a small number that it's just really not going to get us, into a better place in the county. So, knowing the total vaccine rate of all the providers would really be a great way to, if we could track that, that'd be wonderful. We did talk a little bit last week about McConnell Air Force Base, and I understand that their population probably is included in this calculation, but their vaccines provided through those folks is probably not included. So this number probably would be just a little bit higher if we either subtracted out the population or added in their vaccines. It would be higher either way, a little bit. Correct? Okay.
Yes.
I want to talk about the President Biden's mandate on weekly testing as an option. I'm getting lots of phone calls about testing. Does anybody know whether or not that testing, is it required to be PCR, or is antigen testing acceptable to meet the requirements of our president? Do we know?
I know Mike was watching that. I don't know what standard of test. We'll have to research that and find it out.
I would say, in the absence of information, testing is a broad term. It could be PCR or antigen or both COVID testing. So again, without some definition, I would like to keep both of those options on the table. But antigen testing is fairly quick, and it's also fairly inexpensive. It's not as accurate as PCR, obviously, but PCR, being more expensive, takes more time to get the results. It comes up, the next question, of course, then is who's paying for that testing? So if an employer out there, it does provide a testing option in accordance with the president's mandate, they require testing for those employees. Can they use the county to get their weekly testing? And is that going to continue to be free to those people being tested?
I think a question related to that, but that we need to talk about is COVID testing to date. So when Sedgwick County helped fund the lab at WSU, there was a certain amount of testing that we received from WSU for that. And then, of course, the state Spark system came in and allocated a lot of money for testing. So to date, those tests have been funded by either state or county. They've been funded by government. The question moving forward is if we see, and I think when we funded that back in the day, we were thinking this was going to be trailing off and we were going to come to an end of a tunnel, in which we clearly are not. So a discussion to have in the future is, how is this funding going to happen? Do we use ARPA dollars and the county and the state, again, continue to fund testing? Or should it be shoved to private business or individuals? So those are all questions I think we ought to be discussing in the future. But to date, as far as I know, there's still state spark money that is being utilized for testing.
So if someone wants to, say, get on a cruise ship or go fly somewhere or whatever, and there's a screening, a test requirement, they have to show a negative test. I believe they're allowed to show an antigen test result. It doesn't have to be PCR. So in terms of screening, what's happening in the schools, I believe, is antigen testing. What's happening in the NFL, I believe, is antigen testing. I'm not an expert on this, but I think that's what's going on. Again, the antigen tests are typically about 15-minute response. They're $7 to $10 per test. You can even buy them for at home, if I understand correctly. There's all kinds of ways to do antigen testing. I think in terms of screening requirements for employers, it might be a good idea for us to talk about using some ARPA funds to provide, rapid testing, antigen testing for people who need to have screening requirements to stay employed. If we can use that money to help people keep their jobs, that's a really good idea.
We would also be delighted to vaccinate those folks.
I
so
do know
they
that's an
stay
option, but
employed.
for some people, they're not going to do that. So they're going to lose their jobs because they're not willing to get vaccinated. I understand that's an option that they have, but some people aren't going to do it. And so the testing becomes the only real option for them that they're willing to participate in. The question is, would we be willing to put some money towards the screening tests? Again, I would call that the antigen tests, the rapid tests. I think we ought to at least provide that option to people. And again, my hope is to keep them employed and keep them in the workplace. I don't want to see them go unemployed because of this issue. So I think the antigen test ought to be something we ought to offer. Again, the PCR test from the very beginning has always been primarily for people who have symptoms. When you have symptoms, we want to find out, do you have COVID? And we're starting to use PCR tests now as a screening tool. I think it's, again, the actual cost of a PCR test is somewhere probably north of $100, maybe $200. It typically takes about 24 hours for processing. I know MDL can do it less time, a little bit less, sometimes about half a day. But that's not a fast process, and it's very, very expensive. But I don't know if I like using that method for screening to satisfy this requirement of our president. So if this is going to continue to be out there, we ought to consider doing the antigen. I really think it's an important part of our arsenal here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? I don't see any at this time. So thank you, Tim, for the update. And thank you for the correction on the handouts so we can read it a little better. Thank you. Okay, any other, Tom?
No, that's right.
Okay, well, that'll conclude the today's staff meeting. So we'll have a commission meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you.